Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. I'm Joanna Hernandez. Tonight is the latest in our series, WTTW News, A Safer City. We're devoting our entire program to the issues of public and community safety. We'll also be prioritizing public safety in our online coverage. On tonight's program,
just had to process and learn how to walk all over again.
we explore the many challenges facing survivors of gun violence and the resources that are available to help them on their journeys towards healing. We kick off those conversations next.
Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors. Chicago Tonight's coverage of public safety is supported by the Su Ling Jin Charitable Foundation Initiative for Reducing Violence in Chicago.
Gun-related homicides often dominate the headlines when talking about violence in Chicago, but getting less attention are often the survivors of shootings, some of whom are left to cope with physical injuries and long-term disabilities. And according to a new study by Access Living, the physical needs of these survivors are not being met. Joining us now with more are Leslie Helmkamp, Executive Director of the Straightening Chicago's Youth Program at Lurie Children's Hospital, and Guillermo Gutierrez, Violence Intervention Manager at Enlace and a gun violence survivor, and Michelle Garcia, Manager of Organizing and Community Development at Access Living. And joining us via Zoom is Eric Wilkins, founder of Broken Wings and a gun violence survivor. Thank you all for joining us on this very important conversation. Michelle, I want to start with you. What are some of the critical gaps missing in meeting the needs of newly disabled gun violence survivors in Chicago?
So one of the critical needs that we have seen, or gaps that we have seen, are mental health supports for those who have been disabled, who have become disabled, but not only for them, but for their families, because becoming newly disabled is a really critical change, right? From, being well or normal, as they want to call it, to now having a 360 change. So that mental health support is critical so that they can, understand the changes in the process that they're going to be going through step by step. So that's one of the changes, main changes. Also, peer support. Peer support is one of the four components that as Access Living we have in our main components of supports that we offer at Access Living as a Center for Independent Living. And peer support is critical when you are becoming newly injured as well. You need that support from someone who has gone through what you have been through, so that you can relate and say, like, oh, there's somebody who has gone through what I've been through, and I can get that support from that person.
Support is a really big one. And I want to bring Eric in here. You and your organization also contributed to this study, which states there has been more than 37,000 non-fatal shooting incidents in Chicago. Eric, why is there such a big gap between when talking about surviving gun violence?
Well, surviving gun violence here in Chicago is like, it's just everyday. It's an everyday norm. Especially, it's just, it might be a little worse in different areas like Roseland, Inglewood. But if you're disabled, then you're like just one of the ones who so-called is lucky or made it. But I think everyone here is surviving gun violence.
And Eric, you were shot and became paralyzed at the age of 28. Can you tell me some of your biggest challenges when you went back home?
The biggest challenges was really just going back home to a community, being a father, and not having the use of my limbs, and staying in a hospital. You have larger spaces, but coming home, the accessibility was real slim. The house wasn't modified, so I felt more like a prisoner. Mostly stayed in my room and fell into a big depression.
Is that why you would say you started Broken Wings?
Oh yeah, I started Broken Wings, yeah, because of that, and because we when I first got hit, it really wasn't no support for guys who look like me or guys who get hurt from the streets. You know, we were looked on as gang members or thugs. If you're black or you're brown, you had to be doing something wrong. And so the different peer groups that were set up for more people in the PVA, or maybe people who might be bungee jumping, or people that wasn't black or brown, basically.
And Guillermo, I want to go to you. You're also a gun violence survivor yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about your story and what were some of the challenges?
So I realized that I was a survivor of violence at an early age when I noticed it at home. But then at the age of 5th grade, and that was the emotional side, right? But then at 5th grade, my best friend at school got killed, got shot in the head, and unfortunately, there wasn't the programs that there is now. So it was back to, where's your homework? What are you doing? And
you were only in fifth grade.
Correct.
How old were you at that time? I mean,
10.
10 years old.
Yeah, give or take 10 years old. But that emotional challenge that I had back then, which created this anger, right, that took me into another path of life. Ended up getting shot by the age of 13 in my Achilles. In between that age and 22 years of age, I got gun put to my head, shot, grazed, left for dead. But in between, I got stabbed. On one weekend, a week later, I got stabbed 4 more times. Multiple different violent situations. Eventually, I figured out that that wasn't my path and started my transition, and I've been on this path for about 25 years already.
Would you say that led you to Enlace?
Oh, correct, definitely. And it's multiple layers, right? I started as a very low at the bottom of the pole, doing an internship with an AmeriCorps program, joining a nonprofit agency called Build, that led me to different levels of life, and eventually back into my own community, because I started doing work outside of my own community. I've done stuff on national and international level, but eventually came back home to my community where I'm at now.
Well, I can't even imagine all the obstacles you faced. And Leslie, I want to go to you. Sometimes when people are shot, they don't have health insurance. What is it like to heal and survive when you don't have access to health insurance?
It'll add a bigger layer of complexity to getting the care that you need. You might go with unmet needs. You might not seek health care, or you may not have primary care to address any new health needs that arise, and that can happen across the lifespan and complicate quality of life. There's a lot that we need to do to get at those unmet needs, both medical, mental health, and then post-charge from the hospital. We can do really great medical care with and without insurance, but we also need to have supports and financing for supports post-discharge.
And you mentioned data. Is there enough data out there?
Right now, I think a lot of the gaps that we've heard Eric speak about and survivors earlier today at the Access Living report release is that we lack a lot of data on non-fatal firearm injuries. We don't have a federal database of those injuries, so without data, we can't have a roadmap to know where are the survivors, what are their needs, and where do we need to invest more resources. We should absolutely pair that data with all of the stories we're hearing today, and thank you for bringing this to light. It's a really important gap that we need to address. We've had nearly 25 years where the federal government wasn't investing in research and data collection. We're starting to see it move in the right direction, but it's really important that we keep that focus.
And Michelle, the report finds that the most common experience participants shared after being shot was a feeling of criminalization. I know we heard Eric talk a little bit about this. Can you explain this?
Yes. So in our interviews, we interviewed over 100 people. In many of the interviews, the constant theme was that they felt criminalized. That when they were shot and taken to the emergency room, the first instance was like, oh, they must have been involved in some type of situation, and they were being criminalized right at the beginning of their situation, instead of getting treated. So that's what kind of led to a path of, oh, I'm just not gonna get treated. I'll just, go my own way and figure out what to do for my treatment afterwards. Or some of the instances we heard about where like they got treated to begin with, like to be out of like the emergency situation per se, but any other like support needed afterward, they were not provided any supports like therapy or any like medical supply or medical equipment that they needed. That was not said to them like it's available, because again, criminalizing or or racial profiling happens a lot.
Or even having access to that.
Yes.
And Guillermo, I want to bring you in. How are individuals who have been shot vulnerable to reoccurring incidents of gun violence? I mean, you just shared your story.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it goes back to that emotional piece too, right? And feeling left out. All these disinvestments that they do in our communities, from hospitals to therapy to education, provides a level of anger. And once you're mad, you're a lot easier just to retaliate or stay in your feelings. Many of individuals that I know start medicating themselves and go through a different path, unfortunately, but it's a lot has to do with that disinvestment.
Well, thank you, everybody. That's all the time we have. Thank you for your input.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Of course. And 5 years ago, Chicago police officer Derek Jones Jr. went from responding to calls on the job to becoming a victim of gun violence himself. Now, for the first time publicly, he's sharing his story about what life is like as a survivor.
Just keep going no matter what. And like I said, just be yourself motivator, your self-inspiration, your own muse.
You're trying to just keep moving forward.
Absolutely.
Not trying to stay in the past.
Absolutely. You can't get stuck in the past. Life continues to move forward, and so should you.
There was a time 30-year-old Derek Jones Jr. depended on a wheelchair to get around.
Just using the techniques of what the therapist taught me, I just take my time, and I try to avoid swinging my leg outward, and just try to be as strategic as possible, walking up the stairs, no rush. And I would do that several times going up and down the stairs. And
until you felt even more
comfortable.
confident.
Yep. So like I said, it was a struggle at first.
It's the first time Jones shares his story publicly, recounting the traumatic moments that changed his life. Nearly 5 years ago, he was shot in the head.
I was shot at one time. The one bullet fragment is still in my brain to this day. But I was shot at 22 times.
In June 2019, Jones finished his shift at the 6th Police District in Gresham. He had been with the department for 2 years.
I was dating a girl at the time. I decided to go see her like I usually do after work on certain days. And that day, I went to her house and I sat in front of her house and we just talked in our Jeep like we usually do.
Jones says he remembers driving back from a store in Bronzeville with his then girlfriend and noticing a vehicle following his car.
I'm passing the police headquarters at this point on 35th. At the time, I wasn't thinking. I could have easily went to the police headquarters and say, I think this vehicle is following me. But at the time, I wasn't thinking like that because I thought nobody was out to get me or anything. And I turned down, I want to say Michigan. And then I went to 37th on her block. I made another turn, and that's when everything happened.
Next thing he recalls is waking up in a hospital after being in a coma.
I remember seeing a scan of my brain from my surgeon. It was like millimeters away from my brainstem. Had it hit my brainstem, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Despite several leads in the case, no arrests have been made. For his father, Derek Jones Sr., a retired police officer, it's a call no parent wants to get.
He's a strong kid, now 30, 25 years old when it happened. And, for that to happen at a young age, and it's kind of like a lot of your youth has been taken from you. Yeah. But he didn't let that stop him.
I'll show you my hand without my hand brace. This is just helping to keep it open for now. I will stretch my wrists.
He says it's been a physically and mentally taxing journey, one that Derek credits his family and his faith with guiding him through.
You're only going to get as much as you put into it. That's how I saw it. And also my dad, he's just a main factor I keep mentioning my dad because he's always been there, but he was the main contributor to my recovery as far as especially like my arm and stuff like that.
He never gave up on you?
At all. He still believed in me, and I needed that.
With time, Jones has started to gain more mobility. He's back working at the police department, taking on smaller tasks, and pushing himself to travel.
Watching him overcome, I'm proud of him, and what I want for him is to continue. He's working on his master's degree.
Derek says he's ready to share his story in hopes of inspiring other survivors.
Have I made peace? Of course. I have my days, but it's just certain days it hit me like, man, why me? Or a certain song or a scene in a movie will play, and that's when it would reminisce in my mind. I'm not upset with the situation. I have to become at peace with it because it'll drive me crazy. I have to learn to forgive.
And he also shared that one of his inspirations that got him through tough times is Kobe Bryant and his Mamba mentality, focusing on the process and trusting in the hard work when it matters most. And now, as we've just heard, mental health struggles can play a big role in a survivor's recovery. But navigating that journey isn't the same for everyone. Finding the right care can be difficult and often involves unpacking complex trauma. Despite the challenges, mental health professionals say getting the right care for everyone involved is key, not only for healing, but also for stopping future violence. Joining us now with more are Arturo Carrillo, Deputy Director of Health and Violence Prevention at the Brighton Park Neighborhood Council, and Edward Martinez, co-founder and executive director of Centro Sanar. Thank you both for joining us. I want to start with you, Edwin. We've been hearing about people's experiences with traumatic incidents. Can you tell us a little bit about the center's approach when a survivor enters the program at Centro Sanar?
Yeah, no, thank you again for having me. For Centro Sanar, we provide a long-term approach to mental health care coupled with individual, group, and case management support as well. So Centro Sanar dedicates itself to providing high quality care that integrates a lot of cultural practices, but also a lot of high quality care as well, and evidence-based practices.
Is there ever some challenges when a survivor does come in and is not really sure about what to think about therapy?
Mm-hmm. Usually we meet folks where they're at. So it's really about establishing trusting relationships with the folks that have supported them. So they're victim advocates, the church, anybody in the community that has really gathered our services and our resources. And that's part of our approach to Centro Sanar, is that it's not only a one-stop shop, right? But it's also an approach where we're taking a lot of cultural humility in that approach as well.
And Arturo, are some people still hesitant to find mental health care?
Well, what we've seen in our research is actually there's just not enough resources, right? There may be some hesitancy, but the biggest barrier is actually being able to access care, right? We know there's wait lists. Our research has shown that people don't have enough resources in the neighborhood. Compared to affluent neighborhoods, low-income communities of color have an average of 0.1 therapists per 1,000 community residents as compared to 4.5 therapists per 1,000 community residents in more affluent neighborhoods.
Oh, can you tell me about the wait list at Centro Sanar?
Yeah, I was just about to say that, because one of the things that oftentimes survivors of violence encounter, especially with Centro Sanar, is our wait list. So it's difficult to be like, yes, I'm ready for mental health care, but there's also a 15-month wait list.
That's a long time.
And you often get a chance like, can I jump the wait list? It's really about our baseline. A lot of our clients identify with complex trauma, which is around 98% of our client population.
How long is the program there?
So usually we see around 400 people on a regular basis and yearly, and right now our wait list is around close to 500 people at this point.
Why is it important to have someone in a year?
Yeah, no,
it's full year.
For a full year. So trauma is not just a one-time moment. It's a complex history of not only from your childhood, but also from your adulthood. Oftentimes what we find is that people that have been impacted by homicide, as an example, this is not the first adverse child experience. It's not the first trauma. So we're really talking about a long-term approach that takes a year. You're talking about losing a loved one that is gone, right?
You know, that makes a difference. Because I know, as we know, we can go to some mental clinics and the therapist can only have time to see one person a month.
Yep. And so our approach is different. Our approach is around really centering the family, really centering the individual, and offering multiple sessions. So we're offering a caseload that's lower compared to what is a traditional medicalized standard, which is also what community wants. Community wants consistent long-term forms of care, which often means longer wait times and the ability to actually go to the underlying roots of trauma as well.
And we're talking about research. You've done research on the response people want during a mental health crisis. What did you find?
Yeah, so we know that the aftercare is very important, right? People who are engaging a crisis worker are probably at that moment finally ready to talk to somebody, right? And so as we just heard, being able to get somebody connected to services, the follow-up care that's necessary is super critical. Now, one of the things that Centro Sanar is doing is providing long-term spaces for healing, which is critical, it's important. They're also operating in a vacuum. Centro Sanar operates where the public mental health centers were closed, right? So back of the yard centers was one of those resources that could have provided that follow-up care. And as a result, right, we're operating in this mental health desert where unfortunately Centro Sanar now has to carry the load that unfortunately was left there when the public mental health centers were closed.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And what needs to happen to make this possible? You talked about having more mental health resources, but how do you bring them into the community?
So our campaign, Treatment Not Trauma, is focused on creating that system of care in the city of Chicago that is operated by the city itself, right? We need to build a lasting infrastructure, one that doesn't only rely on nonprofits, but instead can have the public mental health centers, which can create spaces for healing, for ongoing support, as well as being a home base for crisis response workers to get into the community, to engage proactively, to identify young people who need to talk to somebody because they were harassed at school, because they were just dealing with a battery situation, right? We want to provide the care in real time, right, before crises escalate. So for us, creating the crisis response community care core that can be based out of public mental health centers is an obligation that the city can fulfill with this administration.
Nedwin, I'm just curious, what drives you to do this work? What's your passion behind this work?
Yeah,
It can be very heavy, heavy work.
Yeah, I think for me specifically, I've been doing this work for 12 years, specifically providing support for homicide victims and their families. I think what gets me grounded is their stories and their commitment to also change different systems. When you ask survivors and you center their voice, they say a lot in terms of what they would wish their system would change it, but also how they would want to be supported as well.
And what got you started to do this work?
It was the death of the loved one. It was the death of my brother, and also how our family navigated that. And I'm 34 now. I was 15 at that point. So there's still an aspect of trauma and hurt that needs to be unpacked, and a similar story.
So when you lost your brother, you said?
Yeah. So that's a piece of my family's history, but that's how trauma and that's how grief works, right? Like
so it's personal. You understand what some families go through.
It's a personal, but also it's not an approach that unpacks my own pain, right? It's centering other folks' pain because my pain is different from others. So it's about centering community voice, it's about centering survivors and that being the forward solution. So when you ask survivors, they're really asking for something that's more long-term, something that actually centers their voice. And for some of that, it's about that. We wish we could be more preventative in nature, but we're constantly having to respond to communities. And as a result, similar to what Arturo was mentioning, that we need a more diverse set of funding. And as a not-for-profit, it's very difficult to do that without a more centered approach to our public health infrastructure.
And again, everyone's journey is so different. Arturo, same question for you. What drives you to do this work?
You know, I think we see so much need in the community. We envision a better system, a better society in which people's mental health is treated with dignity and respect in a preventative way without allowing things to get to the point where crises occur or where people are institutionalized as a result of what could have been prevented.
And what got you started to doing this work?
So I was born and raised in one of those community neighborhoods that has no mental health resources, right? Later I found out that the public mental health centers in my neighborhood were also closed, right? So, you know, growing up, I realized that, you know, I would have benefited from mental health care in a way that if it would have been available to me, would have benefited myself and my family, but it wasn't there. And it wasn't until I became a mental health professional myself that I realized, wow, this is a big need and we need to advocate for more. And this could be something that the city could provide. It is something that, again, just like we fund police, we could fund community clinicians.
And talking about the city, does the city have a role in mental health care?
Absolutely, yeah,
Yes,
and
yes,
historically,
it does.
historically it has, right? Like there was once a time where there was 19 public mental health centers. There was once a time in which communities, mental health centers were a hub for many communities, and we could get back to that.
How many would you say we have now?
Well, currently we only have five remain. Yeah.
You were going to say something?
No, I mean, and it's specifically how it intersects with our community, Latino specifically. We often are addressing insurance access. So more often than not, we're working with folks that don't have insurance, don't have the same access that you would as a similar if you were in a more affluent community or have a Blue Cross Blue Shield PPO plan, right? You're working
navigating health insurance. Also so hard is really understanding.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's some clinics that take PPO or take HMO or Medicaid.
Tell that to a person that just got impacted by violence, right? Where can I see? And specifically for Centro Sanar, we support adults, which typically they would be the ones that won't have insurance or has an insurance that fluctuates. Youth at least have Medicaid, which I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but it's an insurance access point. We're often tackling folks that you typically would not be able to be seen, especially if you have insurance or don't have insurance.
Well, thank you both for your input. You're doing really important work.
Thank you.
And that's our show tonight. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 7 for the Weekend Review. Now, from all of us here at Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, I'm Joanna Hernandez. Stay healthy, stay safe. Buenas noches.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, which is proud to honor founder and senior partner Robert Clifford, who has been named in Forbes' 2024 list of America's top 200 lawyers.